Hello and welcome to the City of Riverbank. My name is Jill Anderson. I'm the City Manager for the City of Riverbank. And as you may know, the City of Riverbank has been evaluating going to by-district elections for more than a year now. We certainly appreciate your coming out today to participate in the process. Currently, the city has an at-large election system, and we're in the process of evaluating go to by district. And there, as you can see, there are 8 different plans that can be evaluated, and we certainly appreciate your input. This afternoon we have Justin Levitt, who's the Vice President for National Demographics Corporation, to review each of the plans and the legal requirements that they meet, and we'll be able to answer any questions that you have throughout this process. We welcome your comments, whether it be online, in public, or if you'd like to email us as well. We want as many people to participate in this process as possible. And so if there's any assistance that you need in that, please contact the City Clerk's office at 899-67, excuse me. We welcome your comments at Riverbank City Hall. Thank you so much. And at this time, Justin, I'd like to hand it over to you to present the material.
Good afternoon. My name is Justin Levitt, Vice President with National Demographics. Thank you to Ms. Anderson for her introduction, and thank you to Ms. Aguilar and to all of those city staff who have organized this event. This is our 8th public hearing, and thank you to all of those who both came today and who are watching at home. We're really glad to hear from you and hopefully get your participation in this process. So I want to kind of start by explaining what we're doing here today. And in particular, what are we talking about when we talk about changing our electoral system? Well, Riverbank, historically, like most cities in California, elected its members at large. This means that everybody in the city voted for each of the 5 members, and each of the members was thus accountable to all the members of the city. Now, what happens is that we're looking at district elections, is that instead of being elected by everybody, members only elected from people who live within a particular community, a particular neighborhood. The people who live in that neighborhood vote for those members, and that member represents the people in his or her district. Now, when we talk about this difference between from district or residence districts and by districts, the former from districts means that the general election still happens at the city level, but the member has to live in a particular district, and the primary election happens within that single district. In contrast, the by-district elections, both the primary and the general election happen within that district, and that member is directly accountable to just the voters of his or her district. Now, under the California Voting Rights Act, which we'll talk about in a second, that by-district category is what gives us the most protection, safe harbor. We'll talk about that in a moment. And that is the system Riverbank is looking at moving to. Now, because Riverbank is a smaller city, they've decided to continue to elect, or we've decided to continue to elect the mayor at large. That means that the mayor will still continue to be elected by all the citizens of Riverbank, but now you will have 2 representatives. The mayor, as well as a member who comes from your individual district. And why are we doing this? Well, we're really doing this because of the California Voting Rights Act. Now, the California Voting Rights Act was first proposed in 2001 by 2 lawyers and enacted in 2002 by Gray Davis. And basically what it does is it makes it a lot easier for plaintiffs to sue jurisdictions that elect at large, that do not have a district-based election scheme. In particular, the old standard used to require us to look at the totality of the circumstances. We had to look at whether candidates ran from different groups. We had to look at whether or not they won. We had to look at where they got support and whether neighborhoods of the city voted differently or not. The new standard only requires that we look at what they call racially polarized voting. And what racially polarized voting is that 2 different groups or communities within your city vote differently. So, for example, if Latinos supported a candidate at 55% and Anglos at a rate of 75%, that would be evidence of racially polarized voting. Even though they supported the same candidate, that difference in rates constitutes racially polarized voting. And just to give you a sense of how widespread it is, of the over 200 jurisdictions that have faced California Voting Rights Act lawsuits, all but one has found racially polarized voting in their jurisdiction. That just gives you a sense of how easy it is to find it and show that it is possible or possibly exists. And certainly here in the Central Valley, we see evidence for it just about everywhere. Now there are other systems that may be defensible. We're not excluding that, but the only way you can really make sure you have a safe harbor under the California Voting Rights Act is to have district-based elections. And this is why we're moving as quickly as possible to save the city so much money. Because the California Voting Rights Act costs a lot of money, or has resulted, I guess, in lawsuits costing a lot of money. Modesto, which was the first real case involved it, they settled for $3 million. And that's in addition to their city's own legal expenses for its defense, ultimately unsuccessful defense. Madera, just down the street, originally was hit with the settlement of $1.8 million until the judge there decided that he didn't approve of their hourly rates and reduced their settlement down. Anaheim recently settled for $1.2 million, in addition to the over $2 million it spent on defending itself from a lawsuit. These are really big fees, and large amounts of money that could be better used on other sorts of city services. And that's really what we're doing here today, is saving the district, trying to save some money. We've seen over 200 jurisdictions change as a result of the California Voting Rights Act. And partly this is just because of the simple demographics on the ground. Latinos make up a majority of the population of the city of Riverbank, but they do not make up a majority of the population when we look at the eligible voter population, or what we call citizen voting age population. That means that they sort of are over the age of 18 and have U.S. citizenship. And so we know that the Latino community, for example, has lower rates of citizenship than other communities, and they tend to be younger. And so this means that Riverbank, like many cities throughout the Central Valley, has a larger share of Latinos of their total population than they do of their eligible voter population. First, to start with the process, kind of just to give you an overview of what's going on. This is, I believe, our 8th public hearing. And we have another public hearing scheduled for next Thursday, not public hearing, public forum. And we have another public forum scheduled for next Thursday, the 29th. And that forum will be at the multipurpose room of Crossroads Elementary School from 6 to 7:30 p.m. In addition to that, we also have an upcoming meeting at City Hall during the regularly scheduled City Council meeting on Tuesday, October 27th at 6 o'clock, I believe. Is that right? 6 o'clock. That will be the first of 3 public hearings. We're required to hold 3 public hearings before we adopt a plan. And this also is due to a state law that mandates that any switch of electoral system, any change in the electoral system, has 2 public hearings in regularly scheduled city council meetings before a plan can be adopted at a 3rd separate regularly scheduled city council meeting. This is to ensure that we get as much public participation and feedback as we can. I know we've done, Riverbank has gone above and beyond what most cities have done, especially cities of its size, in terms of public hearings and public forums. And we really have gotten a lot of people out engaged in this process throughout these past few months. And we look forward to hearing from even more of you as we continue to move through this process. At the end of the day, what we're trying to do is that in 2016 and 2018, we will see the first elections held in these new districts. And so that's the deadline we're working to, is to have these districts ready to go by 2016, by the November 2016 election. This is also in light of a new measure that allows cities, it used to be the case, I'll just start with there, it used to be the case that if you were any city changing its electoral system, before you could even choose a districting plan, you had to put the measure out to the voters and let the voters decide on whether or not they wanted to switch. Now, as we talked about the California Voting Rights Act, a lot of these jurisdictions were forced to switch anyway. And what would often happen is that they were required to hold an election. And if that election was rejected, if the voters of the city said, we don't want that change, the judge would then say, too bad, you have to do it anyway. And this ended up costing cities a lot of money because they have to put the measure on the ballot. And so one of the things that's happened to Whittier, I think they spent nearly $70,000 on having a special election that the voters rejected, and then the judge increased their settlement because they didn't do what they were supposed to do. And so what we're trying to do here is avoid that. And a new law that just went into effect this year allows jurisdictions of under 100,000 people, which the city of Riverbank is under 100,000 people, and it would allow them to opt out of that process and go directly to districts. And so that really makes the most not only financial sense, but also the most sense in terms of the representation. So how do we draw these lines? What kind of things are we looking for when we're drawing districts? The first thing is that we are governed by federal law, particularly Supreme Court decisions. And the main Supreme Court decision or group of the laws we're under is equal population requirements. This is the idea that districts, you might have heard of one person, one vote. Districts have to be equal in terms of population. This is total population. This includes everybody. It includes children. It includes, new immigrants. It also includes people who were staying in hotels in your city on April 1st, 2010 that happened to get counted. And so when we look at this total population, Riverbank has about 24,000 people. We have to divide this equally between the 4 districts, about 6,000 people per district here in the city of Riverbank. And this is something that we have no control over. This is set by the courts. We don't have to get perfect equality. They don't have to be exactly the same number of people, but they do have to be within about 5% of that ideal population. And all 8 of the plans that we have to present for you today are within that deviation limit. The second federal law that we have to look at is the Federal Voting Rights Act. And what the Federal Voting Rights Act does is it discusses protected classes, groups that have historically faced challenges in registering to vote, voting at the polls, obtaining materials in their language. It applies to Native Americans, African Americans, Latinos, and Asian Americans, among other groups, disabled people, all sorts of different groups that have historically faced these sort of challenges. And it requires us to look at the needs of these different communities as we move through the process. Now, let me be clear, race cannot be used as the predominant factor. It has to be one of many criteria that we look into account. In particular, we can't simply say we want to put all of the Latinos in the city into one district so that that district is overwhelmingly Latino and the other districts are not. That would be packing. And conversely, we can't say we're going to divide up the Latino community in such a way that they will not be able to influence any district. That would be cracking. And so what we need to do is look holistically. Where are there clearly defined neighborhoods, communities, areas in which, which have other issues, other things that keep them together, that drive them together as a community? And this tops our list of traditional our traditional criteria that also the state requires we take a look at under the government code. So in addition to communities, we also have to look at natural boundaries. Where do things, and I guess natural and man-made boundaries, where do things like the railroad track and rivers and canals serve to divide communities? And where do they actually create a community between people who live and face the impacts on either side of the tracks, for example? We have to look at compactness and contiguity. Is it possible, or do the districts make sense to us in terms of their shape, in terms of the way that they're laid out on the ground? One of the big challenges here in Riverbank is that the actual railroad track itself is unincorporated. throughout most of the city. And so we're looking at laws, and some of our options you'll see cross the railroad track. That might be okay because that's unincorporated territory. It would be, and so the areas on either side of it may face similar challenges. In addition, we talk about population growth. Obviously, we're doing this in 2015. We're using data mostly from the 2010 census. So how have things changed in the past 5 years? Especially where have houses been built? Where have buildings been torn down? How have things changed on the ground? You're as members of the community, you know more than I do about this, and that's what we're looking for. Finally, I'll talk a little bit, say a couple words about continuity in office. This is the principle that the voters of the city elected a city council, and that redistricting should almost be kind of, not blind to that, and not blind to incumbency, but recognize the fact that that the purpose of redistricting is not to get rid of a particular member. We're not doing this with the eye of eliminating a member of the council. And so the courts have long recognized that incumbency is something that we can take a look at and preserve if possible, as long as it doesn't conflict with the other criteria. So I want to say a couple words about communities of interest, because this is the big one that we're looking at here. What do we get by communities of interest? Well, the best way I've ever heard it put is this concept of shared problems. Areas, neighborhoods that face the same issues. Whether these are issues of street lighting, or of transportation, or police services, fire services. It's hard to define because what constitutes a community of interest in one jurisdiction may actually be very different than what constitutes a community somewhere else. For example, in some areas I'm going to get some water here, thank you. In some parts of the state, some cities I've been to, it's when houses were built, the older neighborhoods versus newer neighborhoods. In other cities, there's a clear divide because there's a freeway that runs through the city, and places on one side of the freeway feel very different than the other side of the freeway. In yet other cities, it has to do with the school districts. There's a division based on where the school district boundary falls, or attendance area boundaries. Say, why attendance areas for a city? Well, it's the city that's paving the roads and dealing with the sidewalks that the students will have to walk on to school. And all those houses that have parents who send their kids to an elementary school and they have issue with the crossing, they have a community of interest that the city can do something about. And so basically this comes down, it's defined by you, members of the community, as to what your communities of interest are. Just to give you some other ones, developments, like commercial developments, new residential developments, road widening, or street changes, sometimes traffic calming projects, issues with utility provision and services. Even if the city doesn't directly handle a lot of these are things that create communities around other issues that the city does handle. And so now I'm going to talk a little bit about each of our plans from A through H. And at the end of this, we're going to ask members of the public to give their feedback on these plans. We have, in addition to the maps here, forums where you can actually write your comments about each of the plans. Don't feel you have to comment on all of them, but we want you to let us know which plans you like, which plans you don't like, and the reasons why. And the more specific you can be, the better. And so if it's, your particular neighborhood, what is it about that district in your particular area that works or does not work? And then these forms, available at City Hall, can also be dropped back off at City Hall, and will make it to the members of the City Council and form part of their deliberation in this process moving forward. So we'll start with Plan A, and this is going to make sure it doesn't go past A. Okay, we'll start with Plan A. Plan A has sort of a cardinal direction approach. It creates 4 districts that kind of are in the north, south, east, and west parts of the city. In terms of compactness, this is one of the most compact plans we've drawn. It creates, it doesn't create an entire district within the Sylvan Elementary School area, but it does create two districts in which a majority of the population comes from that school district area. It does create a northern district that crosses it, but it divides the old downtown part of town into two separate districts. Moving to Plan B. Plan B creates a district that kind of goes right along the railroad track, north and south throughout the city. It creates a very similar district to the in the eastern part of the city. And again, that district includes all of the state streets. And then it creates kind of two north and south districts on the west end of the city. So whereas the district kind of went across the city in Plan A, now it's kind of going down the city along the railroad track. And there's kind of two districts that are kind of square, compact districts on the west end of the city. Plan C offers an arrangement that kind of keeps two districts squarely within the sort of crossroads area. Now, this does create sort of a district, sort of T-shaped District C. It continues to follow the railroad track, but we hope that May does a slightly better job of keeping the area north of Patterson, kind of in the northwest part of the city, in a single district. It also creates a very similar district in the eastern edge of town, which you'll see that the other plans, next Plan D, actually does something very different over there. Plan D is the first that offers sort of a central district right around the railroad track. But instead of kind of creating an entire district to the east, this one creates a southern district that crosses the railroad track to take some of that south end of the state streets and connect it to parts of the crossroads along the very southern end of the city. This one does create a district then that allows us to put all of old downtown, all of central Riverbank together into one district, and does the best job of keeping all the areas north of Patterson in a single district. Plans E and F were plans that we were asked to look at plans that were more horizontally oriented. Plans that actually kind of crossed the city on an east-west direction. And so you see that, for example, here in Plan E, we kind of have four districts that go basically from one end of the city to the other. I know that the one district kind of goes about 3/4 of the way across the city, but it does create kind of east-west oriented districts that do make it most of the way across the city. And so this would unite different communities on the east and west parts of town, not using the railroad track as a barrier, as plans A through C did. F is slightly more compact than E, but it creates something very similar in a way. In fact, there's less of the green district at the south that's on the east side of the tracks. And in exchange, that the yellow district is more of the central area east of the tracks. Plan G returns to this idea of having a central district, but rather than a southern district, it kind of creates one district that's to the west of the freeway, to the east of one district to the east of the railroads, and then taking the two north and south districts, very kind of in the same vein as Plan B, B2, but with a more central district rather than a north-south aligned district. So this one, Plan G, does divide the downtown area, putting a small part of the area immediately east of the tracks in with the area to the west. But it does create a more compact version of a central district plan than D, for example, because it doesn't have a southern district that crosses the freeway. Finally, Plan H looks like is a sort of a compromise between some of the earlier plans, and the desire for more horizontal districts that kind of cross the city. Plan H does not rely on a district crossing the railroad tracks. However, they do kind of radiate out of that unincorporated area.
Wait, I just want some clarification. Where are the tracks? You keep saying where the tracks are.
Okay.
You know, just,
Yeah.
I just need you to point for me really quick. Thanks. So I'm looking up here and I just want to, oh, they're out, it's at the top. Oh, okay.
So-
It goes straight down. Okay, great.
The railroad tracks cross the entire city.
Clear, yeah.
Yeah.
It's not marked here, so I mean, I know where they are.
Yeah.
Red, but, okay,
And
great.
eventually they continue all the way down to Modesto. However, it's harder to see them because all of that area, which is kind of surrounded by Riverbank, is not actually part of the city of Riverbank.
Okay, yeah, that's kind of.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. And yeah, so if you have any other questions, I'm happy to answer that. It is a geographic feature that makes it a little challenging to work around because, it's clearly something where, we would like to even look at that area as, a place to draw districts as part of communities, but it's not actually within the city limits at this point.
And because the reference point is always a track, I just want to,
Yeah.
it's not delineated on
Yeah.
here clearly, so we don't see, how on a regular map we see.
Yeah,
So, yeah, thank you for the clarification.
I apologize.
No worries.
Okay. So in addition to these paper maps, I want to point you to the website where we do have these maps available in a GIS viewer. This doesn't contain street layers and a place where you can type in your address, and it'll take you to basically zoom in on your address, and you can toggle the plans on and off so you can see where you would be under different plans. It will also offer a lot more features, a lot prettier than in the PDF maps, because it uses one of the standard like Google Maps kind of layers underneath it. So, public opinion is really essential in this process. Like what we're doing here today, I'm telling you some basic geographic reference points, but what it really comes down to is, how do you see this for working for your city? It could be that it's a beautiful district, it's very compact, it looks pretty on the map, but we're dividing right up through the middle of a community that really is important to keep together. It could be the case that, yeah, this district looks a little stranger, but actually that's a clear community along a particular development corridor, elementary school attendance area, whatever it is. I mean, this is up to residents of the city, it's up to you, members of the public, to really help us figure out which of these 8 plans works best for the city of Riverbank. And so public opinion is not only welcome, but it's really essential in helping us to make this process work smoothly. And I think that, you guys can offer it, even if it's just a gut instinct. I don't like this. I don't know why, but it's just not working for me. All the way up to, a whole lot of comments that are very specific about, this is the school district attendance that needs to stay together. Whatever it is, we want to hear it. So we hope you will come to our next public hearing on the 29th at Crossroads Elementary School on October 29th, Thursday, October 29th at 6 p.m. or to the City Council meeting on next Tuesday, the 27th at 6 o'clock here in City Hall. Thank you for listening, and thank you for participating throughout this process. This is your future. Let's make it great. And so now, if those of you who are here want to put your stickers or give your feedback about the maps, we'll be sticking around for the next few minutes to answer questions, and I'll provide guidance.